The courthouse basement was never meant to hold secrets. It was meant to hold paper. Dusty shelves, faded ledgers, names written in ink that had long since turned brown. Births, deaths, taxes, property, the everyday record of a society that treated human lives as numbers. But some secrets do not stay quiet. In the summer of 1847, Thomas Hayes discovered one. It happened in silence. No scream, no warning, just a single moment when his pen froze above the page, his hand trembling as if the air itself had turned cold. Thomas Hayes had worked in the Chatham County Courthouse for nearly 20 years. He had seen everything slavery could produce. Broken families, children sold away from mothers, men reduced to prices written beside their names. He believed nothing could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. That afternoon, Hayes was reorganizing records damaged by a leaking roof. Rainwater had soaked several boxes, forcing him to spread documents across a long wooden table. He worked slowly, carefully, sorting tax records and birth registries by plantation name. That was when he noticed it. A notation that did not belong. The entry was dated 1831. Female child, enslaved, born at Thornhill Plantation, but the description made his stomach tighten. Light complexion, European features, questionable origin. Hayes frowned. He had seen similar notes before. Children of mixed ancestry were common in Georgia. Brutally common. Those children were usually labeled clearly. Mulatto, quadroon, terms meant to measure blood-like ingredients in a recipe. This entry did not use those words. He turned the page. Another entry, 1833, male child, enslaved, born at Thornhill Plantation, hair straight and brown, eyes blue-gray, skin pale. Hayes swallowed. He turned another page. Female child, white skin, freckled face, European appearance, all from Thornhill Plantation, all sold before their first birthday. Hayes spread the records across the table, his heart pounding louder with every page. The entries continued with disturbing consistency. Every 18 to 24 months. Always the same description, always the same plantation, always the same outcome, sold young, sent far away, no explanation, no questions asked. By the time he reached the records from 1847, Hayes had counted 11 children. 11, all listed as enslaved, all described as white. Hayes closed the ledger slowly. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. In Georgia, some things were dangerous to notice. He told no one. Thomas Hayes was not a brave man. He was careful. Careful men survived longer in places built on silence. But he was also thorough. He kept records like a priest kept confessions. At home, in a small notebook hidden beneath floorboards, he wrote down what he had seen. Just facts, he told himself. Just records. But at night, sleep refused to come. His mind kept returning to one question. How did a cotton plantation produce white children born to enslaved women again and again without explanation? He did not know that others had noticed too. 2 years earlier, in Savannah, a young woman named Rebecca Hartwell had seen one of those children with her own eyes. Rebecca worked at her uncle's auction house on Broughton Street. It was not respectable work for a woman, but respectability paid poorly. Numbers paid better. She had learned to look at ledgers, not faces. Until one morning in June 1845. The auction house was crowded. Summer heat pressed against the walls. The smell of sweat, tobacco, and fear filled the room. Rebecca sat at her desk, recording bids as people were brought to the platform. Then the room went quiet. Rebecca looked up. A woman stood on the platform with a child beside her. The woman was dark-skinned, strong, and silent. Her face showed nothing. She stared past the crowd as if already gone from the room. The child was different. The boy was small, maybe 5 years old. He clutched his mother's skirt with both hands. His skin was pale. His hair was auburn. Freckles dotted his cheeks. His eyes were green and wide with terror. He looked like a farmer's son. Or a shopkeeper's child. Someone who should have been running through Savannah's streets, not standing on an auction block. The auctioneer hesitated. From Thornhill Plantation, he finally said. Rebecca's pen slipped. The boy was listed as enslaved. Buyers whispered. Some stared openly. Others looked away, uncomfortable in a way Rebecca had never seen before. The child was sold. Rebecca never forgot his face. Years later, when she heard rumors about Thornhill Plantation, she understood why. The ledgers told part of the story. The auctions told another. And buried beneath both was a truth so dark that even a society built on slavery tried not to see it. This was only the beginning. In the next part, we will step beyond the courthouse records and into Thornhill Plantation itself, where whispers followed the Marlowe family and where the fields hid more than cotton. If this story has pulled you in, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss the next chapter. Share this video so others can uncover the truth with us. And leave a comment below. Do you think the records were hiding an accident, or something far more deliberate? Part 2 is coming, and the story only gets darker. Part 2. Everyone in the auction house felt it. That question did not belong in the open air. Where is his father? The words cut through the room like a blade. The auctioneer, Brennan, froze for half a second too long. Long enough for everyone to notice. Long enough for the silence to grow heavy. He shuffled his papers, pretending to search for something that was not there. Not listed in the documentation, sir, he said at last. As is common in such cases. Common. The voice came from the back of the room. A planter with gray hair and a hard stare stepped forward. Look at that child, Brennan. Look at his mother. You expect us to believe that is natural. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Men leaned in closer, not with compassion, with curiosity, with calculation. They studied the boy the way they would inspect a horse's teeth or a mule's legs. The child pressed himself tighter against his mother. His small fingers dug into the worn fabric of her skirt. His green eyes moved from face to face, sensing danger even if he could not name it. Brennan straightened his back. His voice hardened. The documentation is complete and legal, gentlemen. The child was born enslaved and registered properly with Chatham County. The mother's ownership is undisputed. Both are lawful property of Thornhill Plantation, consigned for sale by Mr. Edmund Marlowe. He raised the papers slightly, as if the ink itself could silence doubt. I have all documents in order. But who is the father? Another man demanded. That boy is white as chalk. Someone knows something about Thornhill Plantation, don't they? The question hung in the air. It was not just curiosity. It was accusation. Rebecca Hartwell felt her stomach tighten. She saw her Uncle Edward shift beside the platform. She saw the muscles in Brennan's jaw flex. This was dangerous territory. The father's identity is not relevant, Brennan said sharply. Under Georgia law, the status of the child follows the condition of the mother. Esther is enslaved. Therefore her child is enslaved, regardless of paternity. That is the law. He lifted the gavel. Shall we proceed with the bidding? A planter near the door shook his head. Disgust or fear, Rebecca could not tell. He turned and walked out. 2 others followed. The remaining buyers stayed, but their confidence was gone. The bids came slowly, carefully, as if each man feared that raising his hand meant admitting something he did not want to face. The pair sold for $400. Less than expected. They were purchased by a farmer from Burke County. He did not ask questions. Or perhaps he saw value where others saw discomfort. As the farmer led Esther and her son away, the boy looked back once. His eyes met Rebecca's. She felt something twist inside her chest. When the room finally emptied, Rebecca followed her uncle into his office. He poured whiskey with shaking hands. Uncle Edward, she said softly. That child, how is that possible? He did not answer right away. He drank. You are a clever girl, Rebecca. I think you already know how it is possible. But surely there must be laws, she said. Something illegal about it. Edward let out a bitter laugh. There are laws about violence. About theft. But between a master and his property, there is no crime there. The law allows it. Any child born becomes more property. That is the horror of it. Rebecca felt cold spread through her stomach. Has this happened before? Children like that from Thornhill? Edward's face darkened. This is the 4th time you have seen it since you started working here. There were others before. Always Thornhill. Always the same story. White-looking children. Father unnamed. Papers perfect. 4 times, Rebecca whispered. That we know of. Some may have been sold privately. Some through other auction houses. The Marlowes are careful. They separate the children early. Different counties. Different sales. Why? Because patterns are dangerous, Edward sighed. If people saw them all together, even here someone might start asking questions. Spread them out. Sell them young. Send them far away. Each child becomes a single strange case. Something people forget. Rebecca thought of the boy. Of his eyes. Of his grip on his mother. What will happen to him? The same thing that happens to all enslaved children, Edward sighed quietly. He will work. He will grow. He will never know his father. And because of how he looks, he will never belong anywhere. That night, Rebecca opened her private ledger. June 1845. Esther. Child Thomas. Pale skin, green eyes, auburn hair, Thornhill Plantation, sold to Burke County. Fourth case. She underlined the word fourth twice. Far south of Savannah, Thornhill Plantation stretched across 1,800 acres of lowland soil. From the road, it looked like paradise. The main house rose white and grand against the Georgia sky. 3 stories, tall columns carved by enslaved hands. Wide porches designed to catch the breeze on hot nights. Inside were marble floors imported from Italy. Crystal chandeliers from Boston. Furniture crafted in Philadelphia. A library with thousands of books. A dining room built to host 30 guests. Guests praised Thornhill as one of the finest estates in the county. Behind the house were the gardens. Roses, magnolias, trimmed hedges, a French fountain, a gazebo where ladies sipped tea while enslaved workers stood silently nearby. But beyond the gardens, hidden from view, was the truth. The quarters, long wooden buildings packed with people. Dirt floors, cracked walls, no windows, one well for hundreds, disease, hunger, children sleeping on bare ground. This was where Thornhill's wealth was born. 247 enslaved men, women, and children lived there. They planted cotton, picked it, processed it, cooked, cleaned, built, sewed, served, and somewhere among them were women who gave birth to children that did not fit the world's rules. Children who were sold before they could speak. Children whose fathers were never named. Inside the main house, Edmund Marlowe read his newspaper by lamplight, unconcerned. The ledgers were clean, the law was on his side, and the secrets of Thornhill Plantation remained buried for now. In the next part, we will enter the plantation itself and meet the man whose name never appeared in the records. If this story has gripped you, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss part 3. Share this story so others can uncover the truth. And leave a comment below. Do you think the silence around Thornhill was fear or guilt? The darkness is only beginning. Part 3. Everyone at Thornhill Plantation knew where not to look. The ledgers told one story. Clean numbers, profits rising, births recorded, sales completed, everything neat and lawful. But behind the gardens, past the magnolia trees and the carefully trimmed hedges, there was a building that did not belong in any ledger. It stood quiet beneath live oak trees, Spanish moss hanging like curtains meant to hide something shameful. The cottage. Most people pretended it did not exist. It had been built in 1798, long before Edmund Marlowe inherited Thornhill. A small structure, solid, separate, with its own well and its own garden. A fence circled it tightly, not to keep animals out but to keep people in. The shutters locked from the outside. The doors had heavy bolts. Inside were 4 narrow rooms. Each room held a single bed, a small table, and a chamber pot. No pictures, no mirrors, no comfort. The windows were barred. The air inside always felt thick and stale. Those who whispered about it used different names. The breeding house, the prison, the devil's house. In his private papers, Edmund Marlowe called it the special quarters. Between 2 and 6 women lived there at any given time. Young women, chosen carefully, between 15 and 25. Strong bodies, clear eyes, good teeth, no record of resistance, no family ties strong enough to cause trouble. Once chosen, a woman was moved quietly. No explanation, no goodbyes. She vanished from the quarters and reappeared behind the trees. Life inside the cottage followed strict rules. The women ate better than field hands. Fresh vegetables, meat several times a week. Milk when available. They were given light work like sewing or spinning, work that could be done indoors. They were examined regularly by the plantation physician. And Edmund Marlowe visited. His visits were regular, predictable, treated like part of the plantation schedule. When a woman became pregnant, the visits stopped. Then she was watched closely. If the child was born dark-skinned, ordinary by plantation standards, the mother and child were often returned to the general quarters. Nothing unusual, no questions. But if the child was pale, if the hair was light, if the features looked European, the child was taken, sometimes within hours. The baby would be carried to the main house, fed by a wet nurse, raised just long enough to survive, then sold far away. The mother would be returned to the cottage if she could produce again, or sent back to the quarters if her usefulness was finished. This system had existed for 50 years. 50 years of forced pregnancies. 50 years of stolen children. 50 years of paperwork proving everything was legal. Daniel Prescott did not know any of this when he arrived at Thornhill Plantation in April of 1842. At 32, he was proud of the position. $800 a year. Housing, food, A chance to build a future. He believed hard work and discipline would lead him to owning land someday. For the first few weeks, Thornhill impressed him. The cotton operation ran smoothly. The enslaved workforce was tightly controlled. The records were flawless. Edmund Marlowe was demanding but calm. A man who valued order. Then came the meeting. Marlowe called Prescott into his study one afternoon. The room smelled of old books and polished wood. Marlowe sat behind his massive desk, calm as ever. "You are doing excellent work, Mr. Prescott," he said, "but there is another responsibility we must discuss." He opened a ledger. Prescott recognized it immediately. It was not part of the general accounts. "You know the cottage beyond the gardens?" Marlowe asked. Prescott nodded carefully. "It serves a special purpose." Marlowe spoke without emotion. "I operate a selective breeding program on this estate. Certain women are housed separately under controlled conditions to produce children of high value." Prescott felt his stomach twist. "The children often have light skin and European features," Marlowe continued. "They sell well, especially for domestic service." Prescott wanted to speak, wanted to object, but the words stuck. "Your duties include overseeing this program," Marlowe said. "Feeding, medical care, transport of the children to Savannah. Discretion at all times." Prescott tried to refuse. Marlowe did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He spoke of contracts, of wages already paid, of lawyers, of ruined reputations, of how quickly a man could be destroyed if plantation owners decided he was unreliable. Prescott understood. He had no choice. For 7 months, he did the work. He arranged meals for the cottage. He contacted the midwife. He recorded births that made him feel sick. He watched infants taken from their mothers while the women screamed into pillows to avoid punishment. At night, he did not sleep. In November, a woman named Grace gave birth to a boy. Pale skin, blonde hair, blue eyes. Marlowe examined the baby like merchandise. "Excellent specimen," he said. "Arrange transport to Savannah in 6 months. Do not let the mother see him again." That night, Prescott broke. Before dawn, he packed a single bag and fled north. He left money behind. He left his career behind. He left with nothing but the images burned into his mind. Marlowe tried to hunt him down. Lawyers were sent. Letters followed. But Prescott vanished into the mountains of North Carolina. And he never spoke of Thornhill again. Because who would believe him? But the ledgers remained. The cottage remained. And the children kept disappearing. In the next part, we will follow the trail of one of those children after the sale and uncover what happened when the pattern finally became impossible to ignore. If this story has gripped you, subscribe now so you do not miss part 4. Share this video so the truth does not stay buried. And leave a comment below. Do you think silence makes people innocent or guilty? The horror of Thornhill Plantation is far from over. Part 4. Some children disappear quietly. No screams. No witnesses. Just a name written once in a ledger and never again. But one child from Thornhill Plantation did not disappear as cleanly as Edmund Marlowe intended. His trail was faint, scattered across counties and records, but it existed. And years later, that trail would begin to connect the secrets that Thornhill had tried so carefully to bury. His name was Thomas, born in the breeding cottage. Pale skin, light hair, green eyes, taken from his mother before he could form memories strong enough to survive. Sold at auction in Savannah. Purchased by a farmer in Burke County. From there, the story should have ended. It did not. Burke County was poorer than Chatham. The soil was rougher. Cotton grew thinner. Farmers worked their land hard and lived closer to ruin than comfort. Thomas's buyer was a man named Silas Crowder, a widower with 2 surviving children and debts that never seemed to shrink. Crowder did not buy Thomas for the fields. The boy was too small, too light, too noticeable. Instead, Thomas worked inside the house. Cleaning, carrying water, running errands. Visitors often mistook him for Crowder's own child. Crowder never corrected them. That confusion became useful. Thomas could go places other enslaved children could not. Into town, into shops, sometimes into homes where darker-skinned children would have been turned away. But the confusion also brought danger. By the time Thomas was 10, people began to notice. His appearance did not match his status. Questions followed him like shadows. Whose boy is that? Why does he look like that? Is he really enslaved? Crowder learned quickly that Thomas was becoming a liability. In 1851, Crowder sold him. Privately. No auction, no crowd, no questions asked. Thomas was sold to a traveling trader moving west toward Alabama. From there, the records become thin. A bill of sale here. A name crossed out there. Thomas became Tom, then Tommy, then simply Boy. By 1855, he appeared on a plantation near Montgomery. By 1858, he vanished again. But something unusual happened during those years. Thomas learned to read. It happened by accident. A mistress's son grew bored during lessons and forced Thomas to sit nearby. Letters stuck. Words formed. Knowledge crept in quietly. Reading was forbidden. Dangerous. But once learned, it could not be unlearned. By the time Thomas was 15, he understood enough to read notices. Laws. Names. And one day, he read his own origin. Thornhill Plantation. He did not know why the name mattered. Only that it followed him. Appeared again and again in old papers. Bills of sale. Transfers. Like a stain that could not be scrubbed away. In 1861, the world cracked open. War came. Plantations emptied of men. Order collapsed. Overseers fled. Records burned. Enslaved people ran when they could. Thomas ran too. He followed Union troops when they passed nearby. He survived by blending in. Looking white enough to avoid suspicion. Enslaved enough to disappear when needed. By 1865, slavery ended on paper. Freedom arrived unevenly. Thomas was 20. He had no family, no surname, no home, but he had questions. In the chaos after the war, records surfaced. Courthouses reopened. Old ledgers were pulled from dust. People searched for lost relatives. For stolen children. For proof of freedom. In Savannah, an aging courthouse clerk named Thomas Hayes watched as the past returned to demand answers. Hayes had never stopped keeping his private ledger. When Thomas walked into the courthouse in 1866, Hayes noticed him immediately. Pale skin, green eyes, something familiar in the shape of his face. Thomas asked a simple question. I was born enslaved, but people tell me I look white. I want to know who my father was. Hayes felt the old fear return. He searched the records quietly, carefully, cross-referencing names and dates. Plantation origins. Thornhill. Hayes closed the ledger with shaking hands. He knew exactly who this man was. He also knew what the truth would do to him. The law had changed. Slavery was gone, but power still existed. Wealth still protected itself. Edmund Marlowe was older now. His influence weakened but not gone. Hayes faced a choice he had avoided for 20 years. Silence, or truth. He told Thomas what he knew. About the cottage, about the children, about how records were altered to protect a powerful man. Thomas listened without interrupting. When Hayes finished, there were tears in his eyes, but his voice was steady. So my father was my owner. Hayes did not answer. He did not need to. Thomas left the courthouse with answers that brought no comfort. He was free now, but freedom did not erase what had been done to him, or to his mother, or to the others whose names were lost. That night, Thomas wrote his name for the first time. Thomas Hart. He chose it himself. He would spend the rest of his life telling the story no one wanted to hear. Speaking in churches, writing letters, searching for others like him. And slowly, painfully, the pattern of Thornhill Plantation began to surface. In the next part, we will see how those stories spread and how Edmund Marlowe finally realized that silence could no longer protect him. If this story has moved you, subscribe now so you do not miss part 5. Share this video so these voices are not lost again. And leave a comment below. Do you believe truth always finds a way out, or can power bury anything forever? The reckoning is coming. Part 5. The truth does not shout at first. It whispers. It slips from mouth to mouth, from church pew to courthouse steps, from one quiet conversation to another. And before anyone in power realizes it, the whisper becomes something louder. Something dangerous. By 1867, Edmund Marlowe could feel it. Thornhill Plantation still stood, but it was no longer untouchable. The war had stripped away more than slaves. It had stripped away certainty. Federal agents walked Georgia roads now. Freedmen gathered openly. Old rules no longer carried the same weight. And stories were spreading. Thomas Hart spoke carefully at first. He had learned that truth needed patience if it was to survive. He told his story in black churches where people listened in silence. He told it to teachers from the north who had come south to educate the newly freed. A pale-skinned man, born enslaved, sold away from his mother, tracing his origin to Thornhill Plantation. Others began to come forward. Not loudly, not all at once. A woman in Liberty County remembered a child who looked white but worked in the fields. A preacher recalled baptizing a boy with blue eyes who was owned by a cotton planter. A clerk in Glynn County found old sale records that made no sense. Thornhill appeared again, And again, and again. Patterns are powerful things. They frighten people who rely on isolation to protect their sins. By 1868, federal investigators had begun quietly reviewing plantation records across coastal Georgia. Officially, they were searching for illegal labor practices. Unofficially, they were following rumors. Edmund Marlowe heard the rumors long before the investigators arrived. He was an old man now. His hair white, his hands spotted and shaking. But his mind remained sharp. Sharp enough to understand danger. He burned papers, not the official ledgers. Those were clean, legal, perfect. He burned the private journals. The coded notes. The documents that explained too much. The cottage behind the gardens was emptied. The fence removed. The windows unbarred. It was renamed servant housing. As if names could erase memory. When federal agents finally came to Thornhill, they found nothing illegal. No enslaved workers. No locked doors. No evidence that could survive a courtroom. Only whispers. And whispers were not enough. But the past has a way of leaving scars. Thomas Hayes was retired by then. His hands too weak for clerking. His private ledger hidden beneath his floorboards had grown thick with additions. When an investigator named Samuel Booker visited Hayes in 1869, he did not announce his purpose. He spoke of weather, of health, of the difficulty of rebuilding a country torn apart. Then he asked a question. Did you ever notice anything unusual about Thornhill plantation records? Hayes closed his eyes. He was tired of carrying this alone. He showed Booker the ledger. Names, dates, children sold, counties scattered, the same handwriting, the same language, over and over. Booker read in silence. This is not proof, he said finally. No, Hayes replied, but it is truth. Booker nodded slowly. Truth has a way of finding proof. The investigation stalled. Witnesses were afraid. Records were missing. Edmund Marlowe's lawyers argued skillfully. No, charges were filed, but something had changed. Marlowe was no longer invited to public gatherings. Church doors closed quietly when he approached. Former allies avoided his gaze. And then came the letter. It arrived in 1871, written in careful hand. Dear Mr. Marlowe, I believe I am your son. Marlowe stared at the paper for a long time. The letter was from Thomas Hart. He did not accuse. He did not threaten. He only asked, did you know my mother's name? Did you know what became of her? Did you ever think of me as human? Marlowe never replied. He died the following winter. In his bed, in his house, surrounded by comfort bought with suffering. No court ever judged him. No sentence was spoken, but judgment came anyway. After his death, Thornhill was sold. The land broken apart. The cottage torn down for lumber. The gardens left to rot. Yet the story lived on. Thomas Hart continued speaking until his voice grew weak. He helped others search for lost children. He taught when he could. He wrote letters that historians would later find disturbing and undeniable. Rebecca Hartwell lived long enough to see those letters published anonymously in abolitionist journals. She recognized the handwriting. She recognized the pain. And Thomas Hayes died knowing he had finally spoken. Thornhill Plantation disappeared from maps. But it never disappeared from memory. In the next part, we will see how the children of Thornhill searched for one another and what happens when a hidden history refuses to stay buried. If this story has held you, subscribe now so you do not miss part 6. Share this story so the past is not erased again. And leave a comment below. Do you think justice requires courts, or is truth itself a form of reckoning? The shadows of Thornhill are not finished yet. Part 6. Some wounds do not bleed. They echo. Years after Thornhill Plantation was broken apart, its shadows still moved through Georgia like a sickness that refused to heal. The land was divided, the house sold, the cottage torn down, but the people shaped by that place carried its mark in their faces, in their memories, and in the questions they could never stop asking. Thomas Hart learned quickly that he was not alone. After Edmund Marlowe's death, letters began to find Thomas. Some were cautious, some desperate, some written in shaking hands by people who had never written much before. I was born enslaved but look white. I was sold young and never knew why. My mother cried every time she looked at me. All of them mentioned the same name. Thornhill. Thomas traveled when he could. He walked dusty roads. He rode wagons. He slept in church basements and spare rooms offered by strangers who saw something haunted in his eyes. In small towns, people stared. Some with curiosity, some with anger, some with fear. A man who looked white speaking openly about being enslaved unsettled everyone. It broke the rules they relied on to make sense of the world. In Liberty County, Thomas met a woman named Sarah Collins. She was 35, with pale skin and dark eyes that never seemed to rest. She worked as a seamstress. Quiet, careful, she had been sold at 12. Her mother never spoke of Thornhill. Never said the father's name. Only cried when Sarah asked. When Thomas told her about the cottage, about the women chosen and the children taken, Sarah sat down hard on a bench and covered her mouth. I remember the fence, she whispered. I remember being fed better. I remember thinking I was special. Then the baby came, and they took him. Sarah's hands shook. I thought I was alone. They were not alone. By 1875, Thomas had met 6 others like him. Men and women scattered across Georgia and Alabama. All with pale skin, all born enslaved, all traced back to Thornhill. They did not call themselves a family, not yet, but they met when they could. Shared what they knew, compared memories, compared scars. Each story filled another gap. They learned that the cottage had existed for decades. That overseers came and went. That some left quietly and others stayed. They learned that mothers were chosen young and discarded when no longer useful. They learned that many children never survived long enough to be sold. That knowledge hurt the most. Some names would never be found. Not every reaction to their story was kind. In Savannah, Thomas was threatened after speaking at a meeting. A man warned him to stop digging up the past. In rural counties, doors closed when people realized what he was talking about. Some called him a liar. Others said he was trying to shame white families. Even some freed people were uneasy. Your story makes trouble, Thomas was told. We just want peace. But Thomas believed peace built on silence was another form of prison. Rebecca Hartwell was older now. Her hair silver, her hands stiff with age. She followed the reports quietly, recognizing details she had once written in her private ledger. She decided to do something she had avoided for decades. She published her records. Not under her name, she sent copies of auction entries to newspapers in the North. To historians, to churches, to anyone who might listen. Dates, descriptions, plantation names. Thornhill appeared again. The response was slow but powerful. Northern papers printed articles about the breeding of enslaved women. About children sold because they looked white. About plantations that ran programs designed to produce human property with specific traits. Many readers refused to believe it. Others were horrified. In Georgia, old families felt exposed. Some denied everything. Some quietly paid to have articles buried. Some burned letters and journals they feared might surface next. But history had shifted. In 1881, a young historian named Caleb Monroe traveled south to collect first-hand accounts of slavery before they vanished. He met Thomas Hart. He listened for hours. He wrote everything down. This is not just cruelty, Monroe said quietly. This is a system. Yes, Thomas replied. And systems survive when people pretend they are accidents. Monroe's book would not be published until years later. But when it was, Thornhill Plantation became a case study. A name students would read. A truth that could no longer be erased. Time moved on. Some of the children of Thornhill married. Some passed as white. Some stayed within black communities. All carried complicated lives shaped by violence they did not choose. Thomas never married. He believed he was already tied to too many ghosts. He continued searching for names. For mothers. For proof. In 1890, he found one final record. A burial entry. Hannah. No surname. Age unknown. Formerly of Thornhill Plantation. Thomas sat with the paper in his hands for a long time. Hannah. The name appeared in the earliest ledgers. One of the first women selected. One of the first to disappear. Thomas did not know if she was his mother. But he spoke her name aloud anyway. For the first time in history, her name was not locked in a ledger. It was spoken. That night, Thomas wrote in his journal. They tried to turn us into property, into numbers, into silence. But silence does not last forever. Memory leaks through cracks. And once spoken, truth does not return to the dark. In the next part, we will see how the final secrets of Thornhill surface and how a hidden crime becomes a warning passed down through generations. If this story continues to move you, subscribe now so you do not miss part 7. Share this video so these voices are never buried again. And leave a comment below. Do you think remembering the past is painful or necessary? The echoes of Thornhill are still speaking. Part 7. Some secrets survive longer than the people who created them. They hide in bloodlines. In faces that look familiar for reasons no one can explain. In family stories that stop suddenly, as if someone decided mid-sentence to never speak again. By the 1890s, Thornhill Plantation was gone, but its children were everywhere. They lived under different names. In different towns. Some passed as white and never spoke of their past. Others stayed within black communities, carrying stories that sounded impossible to anyone who had not lived them. And then the grandchildren were born. They were the ones who noticed first. A child with light hair in a family of dark faces. A girl with blue eyes who did not resemble either parent. A boy whose reflection raised quiet questions no one wanted to answer. People called it chance, God's will, a mystery best left alone. But Thomas Hart knew better. Age had bent his back, but it had sharpened his purpose. He began writing letters again, slower now, his hand stiff, his eyesight fading. If you were born enslaved and your family has unanswered questions, write to me. The letters came from Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, even from as far as Texas. Stories repeated themselves. My grandmother was sold young and never spoke of her mother. My father looked white but was treated as property. No one knows where we came from. Thomas began mapping them, not on paper, in his mind. All roads led back to one place. Thornhill. In 1894, Thomas was invited to speak at a small gathering in Macon. It was not a large crowd. A few teachers, a minister, a historian, some local families. Among them was a young woman named Eleanor Price. She was 22, well-dressed, nervous. She waited until the others left before approaching Thomas. I think my grandfather was one of them, she said. Eleanor was white, or so she had always been told. Her grandfather had been adopted. His origin never discussed. Her family carried old money and old discomfort. Certain questions were never welcome. But Eleanor had found something. A box hidden in her attic. Inside was a folded paper. A bill of sale. A child, age 6 months, pale complexion, sold from Thornhill Plantation. Thomas closed his eyes. Another thread. Eleanor was shaken. Everything she believed about her family felt unstable. Does this make me something else? She asked. Thomas looked at her gently. It makes you human, he said. Like the rest of us. The truth frightened people like Eleanor because it broke the lie that history had clean lines. Blood did not respect the rules. Power had written laws, but bodies remembered everything. When Eleanor returned home, she told her family what she had found. They did not thank her. She was told to forget it. To burn the paper. To stop digging. She refused. Within months, she was cut off financially. But she did not stop. Eleanor began corresponding with historians. With churches. With Thomas. She became something dangerous. A witness from the other side of the color line. Around the same time, graves began to surface. Literally. In 1897, workers clearing land near the old Thornhill property uncovered shallow burial sites. No markers. No names. Small bones. Too small. Local officials wanted the matter closed quickly. Said they were probably poor graves from an old outbreak. But one man disagreed. Caleb Monroe, the historian, returned. He examined the site. The location matched old plantation maps. Near where the cottage once stood. The bones belonged to infants. Too many. The story broke quietly, then loudly. Newspapers avoided graphic detail but could not ignore the implication. Children who never made it to sale. Children who never entered a ledger. Children who were erased. Completely. Public reaction was divided. Some demanded investigation. Others said it was cruel to judge the past by modern standards. But the dead do not care about arguments. They only care about being seen. Thomas attended the reburial. He stood silently as small coffins were lowered into the earth. He did not know if any of them were related to him. It did not matter. They were his people. That winter, Thomas fell ill. He knew he was running out of time. He gathered his papers, his letters, his notes, everything he had collected over decades. He gave them to Eleanor. You must carry this now, he told her. She hesitated. People will hate me. They already do, Thomas said. Truth always makes enemies. Thomas Hart died in 1898. His funeral was small. Black and white mourners stood together in uneasy silence. That alone would have shocked the past. After his death, Eleanor published a collection of testimonies. Names were changed, details protected, but Thornhill Plantation was named clearly. The reaction was explosive. Some families recognized themselves and panicked. Others recognized the truth and wept. The book was banned in parts of the South. That only made it more powerful. By the turn of the century, Thornhill had become a warning. Not just of slavery, but of what happens when power believes it owns bodies, futures, and silence. In the next part, we will see how Thornhill's legacy reaches into the modern world and how descendants confront a truth that still refuses to stay buried. If this story has stayed with you, subscribe now so you do not miss part 8. Share this video so history is not rewritten again. And leave a comment below. Would you want to know the truth about your past, even if it changed everything? The ghosts of Thornhill are not finished speaking. Part 8. The past does not stay buried. It waits. It waits in courthouse basements. In forgotten photo albums. In family Bibles where names suddenly disappear. It waits patiently until someone is brave enough or foolish enough to look too closely. At the start of the 20th century, America wanted to move forward. New machines, new cities, new dreams. People were tired of slavery stories. They said it was over. Finished. Done. But Thornhill Plantation refused to remain a closed chapter. After Thomas Hart's death, Eleanor Price became the keeper of a truth that felt heavier every year. She traveled north and south, carrying copies of testimonies, old sales records, and letters written by people whose lives had been shaped before they were born. Everywhere she went, the reaction was the same. Shock, denial, fear. Some audiences listened in silence. Others stood up and shouted. A few walked out before she finished speaking. "You are reopening wounds," one man told her. Eleanor answered calmly. "Wounds that were never cleaned do not heal." In 1904, a university in Ohio invited Eleanor to speak. Among the audience were young scholars, journalists, and one man who would change everything. His name was Henry Walsh. He was a lawyer, and he was curious. After her lecture, Henry approached Eleanor with questions that were careful and precise. Not emotional, not defensive, legal questions, property law, inheritance, identity. If children were sold illegally or without record, he asked, what does that mean for the wealth built from them? Eleanor understood immediately. This was dangerous territory. Henry began investigating plantation estates connected to Thornhill. He noticed something strange. Several powerful families had unexplained gaps in their records. Sudden transfers of land, money appearing without clear source. Human profit hidden inside paperwork. Henry prepared a case. Not criminal, civil. The idea alone terrified people. In Georgia, whispers spread that old families might be exposed. Lawyers were pressured. Judges warned quietly. Some records vanished overnight, but not all, because the truth had already spread too far. In 1908, a lawsuit was filed. Descendants of enslaved people connected to Thornhill sought acknowledgement and compensation. Not revenge, recognition. The newspapers called it outrageous, impossible, un-American. But for the first time, Thornhill was no longer just history. It was evidence. Families scrambled. Some denied any connection. Others blamed overseers long dead. A few privately admitted the truth but refused public responsibility. The case dragged on for years. Most claims were dismissed. But something important happened anyway. The testimonies were entered into public record. Forever. At the same time, science entered the story. Not the science we know today, but something new for the time. Blood typing. Doctors noticed patterns. Similar traits appearing in families who claimed no relation. Physical markers that repeated themselves across communities divided by race and class. They did not fully understand it yet. But they felt something was wrong with the old stories. In 1915, a journalist named Ruth Carter published a series called Bloodlines. She connected Thornhill to modern families. She wrote about women chosen for their bodies, children sold for their skin. The reaction was fierce. Her newspaper received threats. She was called a liar, a traitor, worse. But the public read every word. Letters poured in. My grandmother came from there. My uncle was sold as a child. My family never explained why we look like this. The silence cracked. But silence fights back. In the South, schools quietly removed references to Thornhill. Libraries locked certain books away. Teachers were warned not to stir trouble. History was being edited in real time. Eleanor noticed something else too. Fear, not guilt. Fear. Fear that the lie holding everything together was thin. That bloodlines crossed too many boundaries. That the story of who was white and who was black was never as clean as it claimed to be. Eleanor herself paid a price. She was followed. Letters disappeared. Invitations stopped coming. Former friends avoided her. One night, her home was broken into. Nothing stolen, only her papers disturbed. A warning. She did not stop. Instead, she made copies and sent them everywhere. Churches, universities, newspapers, safe places. You cannot erase what has multiplied. By the 1920s, Thornhill had become a quiet reference point among scholars and activists. Not always spoken aloud, often whispered, a symbol of how far power went, and how far its echoes reached. Children of Thornhill were now grandparents. Some had never spoken of their past. Others had told everything. The truth created tension inside families. Some relationships broke, others grew stronger. One elderly woman said something Eleanor never forgot. "I spent my whole life pretending not to know why my mother cried. Now I know, and the knowing hurts, but the not knowing was worse." As Eleanor aged, she wondered if anything had truly changed. Then she received a letter from a young teacher in Georgia. He wrote that he had taught his students about Thornhill, that they asked questions, that they wanted to know more, that they did not want lies. Eleanor smiled for the first time in weeks. The past had reached the future, and the future had listened. In the next part, we will see how Thornhill's legacy collides with modern identity, science, and the final confrontation between truth and denial. If this story matters to you, subscribe now so you do not miss part 9. Share this video so the past cannot be buried again. And leave a comment below. Should history protect comfort or reveal truth? The shadow of Thornhill is growing closer. Part 9. Some ghosts do not scream. They testify. They appear in court documents, in medical charts, in family photos where faces look familiar but names do not match. They surface not to haunt dreams, but to challenge identity itself. By the 1930s, the story of Thornhill Plantation had stopped being just a rumor whispered among scholars. It had become something much more dangerous. Proof. America was changing. The Great Depression forced people to look closely at money, power, and who had benefited most when others had nothing. Old families who once lived quietly on inherited wealth were suddenly questioned. Where did it come from? And who paid for it? The Thornhill records became part of a larger conversation about stolen labor and stolen lives. But this time, the discussion went deeper than chains and cotton fields. It went into blood. Doctors and researchers had advanced far beyond simple observation. Blood typing had improved. Medical inheritance was being studied. Traits once blamed on coincidence were now tracked with charts and probabilities. And Thornhill appeared again, over and over. Families who claimed no connection showed markers that should not exist. Physical traits, rare conditions, shared characteristics between white families and black families living miles apart. Something had crossed lines long ago. Something that paperwork tried to hide. A young researcher named Samuel Green took a special interest in these patterns. He did not begin with Thornhill. He arrived there accidentally, following anomalies in medical data from Georgia and South Carolina. Every trail led back to the same cluster of plantations, including Thornhill. Samuel requested access to archived materials at a university library. What he found chilled him. Birth records that did not match sale records. Children sold before they could legally be weaned. Women listed without surnames, then erased entirely. And one recurring note written in careful handwriting. Special quarters. Samuel knew what that meant. He contacted Eleanor Price, now elderly but still sharp. When he laid out his findings, she sat silently for a long time. Then she said something he did not expect. "I always feared the truth would be worse than we knew." Together, they prepared a report. Not emotional, not political, scientific. They presented evidence that Thornhill had functioned as a controlled human breeding operation for decades, producing children for profit based on appearance. It was not just cruelty. It was design. When the report was submitted for publication, it was rejected. Too controversial, too speculative, too dangerous. Samuel was advised to let it go. He did not. Instead, he leaked the findings to an investigative magazine. The response was explosive. The article did not accuse individuals by name. It accused a system that treated human beings as raw material. Some readers dismissed it as propaganda. Others felt something shift inside them. Phone calls poured in, people asking questions they had never dared to ask before. Why does my family look like this? Why was my grandmother never allowed to talk about her mother? Why were certain names missing? But backlash came swiftly. Funding was pulled. Samuel lost his research position. Eleanor received anonymous letters telling her to stop digging. One letter included a copy of a Thornhill ledger page, with her handwriting circled, a message without words. That winter, Eleanor fell ill. Samuel visited her bedside. She pressed a folder into his hands. "If something happens to me," she whispered, "do not let this disappear again." She died 2 weeks later. Her death barely made the papers. But her work survived. The next phase of the story did not unfold in libraries or courts. It unfolded inside families. Quietly, people began talking to grandparents. Old trunks were opened, photographs examined closely, secrets surfaced. A white woman in Alabama discovered her great-grandfather had purchased a child from Savannah matching the Thornhill descriptions. A black family in Florida traced their ancestry to a woman listed only as Grace in Plantation records. The names connected, the lines crossed, and the lie weakened. By the 1950s, America was fighting itself over segregation and civil rights. Thornhill resurfaced again, cited by activists as proof that racial boundaries were artificial, enforced by power, not truth. Opponents reacted with anger. If bloodlines were mixed, then the entire structure of separation collapsed. That terrified them. Some states quietly sealed archives. Others lost records in convenient fires. But something had changed. People remembered. And memory does not burn easily. Samuel Green grew older. He never regained his academic standing, but he became something else. A keeper. He traveled, spoke quietly, handed copies to those who asked sincerely. He believed the truth did not need shouting. It needed patience. Near the end of his life, Samuel visited the ruins of Thornhill Plantation. The cottage was gone, torn down decades earlier. Only a patch of uneven ground remained. He stood there for a long time. "This is where it happened," he said softly. Not just the violence, the lie, the idea that you could separate blood from humanity. As the wind moved through the trees, he felt something heavy lift. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. In the final part, we will confront what Thornhill means today. How its legacy lives inside modern DNA, modern families, and modern silence. And whether truth, once fully seen, can finally set something free. If you want the ending of this story, subscribe now so you do not miss part 10. Share this video so these voices are not lost again. And leave a comment below. Do you think the past ever truly stays buried? Part 10 Final part. Some truths cannot be silenced. They do not stay in ledgers. They do not stay buried in basements. They live in people, in bloodlines, in memories carried quietly from one generation to the next. By the mid-20th century, Thornhill Plantation was a ruin. The main house had crumbled. The fields lay fallow. The river that once carried cotton now whispered over stones that no one recognized. But the children of Thornhill, the ones born into a system designed to erase them, were everywhere. They carried their inheritance in ways nobody could see at first glance. Pale skin, blue or green eyes, freckles, curly hair that looked European, and the unspoken question that haunted every introduction. Who am I? Where did I come from? Families that had passed for white discovered secrets hidden in trunks, in letters, in old photographs. Families that had always identified as black found connections in hospital records, DNA tests, and oral histories. Thornhill had been a lie written in contracts and courts, but it could not erase biology or memory. By 1965, genealogists and civil rights researchers were piecing together the network of children born at Thornhill. They discovered the cottage, once called the breeding house, in plantation maps preserved in university archives. They documented every mother who had been confined, every child sold, and every ledger meticulously maintained by clerks like Thomas Hayes and Rebecca Hartwell. Modern DNA testing began confirming what had been whispered for over a century. Children who looked white were descended from women enslaved at Thornhill. Families separated by decades discovered they shared more than features. They shared ancestry. Bloodlines that had been deliberately crossed, catalogued, and sold as property were finally understood as human. Descendants began meeting, cautiously at first. Small groups, tentative conversations, handwritten letters. They shared photographs, stories, and tears. Some were shocked to find relatives who had been considered strangers for decades. Some were afraid. Some were relieved. At a reunion in Savannah in 1972, over 50 descendants gathered. Some were black. Some were white. Some had always lived in poverty. Some had inherited wealth built on cotton and labor. For the first time, no one asked about color. No one asked about the past. They asked only, who are we? They walked the ruins of the plantation. They imagined the cottage where mothers had been confined, where children had been taken away within hours or months of birth. They listened to the river that had carried cotton and tears for generations. They marked the graves of infants discovered in shallow burial plots. They placed flowers. They spoke names aloud that had never been spoken before. The act of naming became a ritual. It became a way to reclaim lives stolen from memory. Hannah, Grace, Esther, Thomas, Sarah, and the hundreds of others whose names were lost to paper and fire. Modern historians began publishing papers on Thornhill, linking it to broader patterns of human exploitation. Books, documentaries, and eventually television programs brought the story to a national audience. Some called it shocking, some called it unbelievable, but the evidence was undeniable. Ledgers, letters, photographs, and DNA tests told the story that the plantation owners had tried so hard to hide. Families that had been divided for over a century began rebuilding connections. Cousins discovered each other, aunts met nieces, brothers and sisters found each other through genealogical research. They shared holidays, meals, and stories of survival. Thornhill's legacy, though rooted in horror, became a bridge for understanding. The final truth of Thornhill was not only about slavery. It was about the persistence of memory. About the resilience of people who refused to be reduced to numbers in a ledger. About how justice, even delayed by decades, can begin in acknowledgement. Some descendants chose to carry the story forward in activism. They fought for reparations, for recognition, for education. They visited schools and universities to teach about Thornhill and the lessons it held about power, secrecy, and the humanity that cannot be bought or sold. Others chose quiet remembrance. They told the story to their children in private. They marked graves. They preserved letters. They named the ancestors. The final ledger, once hidden by Thomas Hayes and Rebecca Hartwell, was digitized and made publicly accessible. Scholars could trace births, sales, and ownership. The pattern that had terrified clerks and auctioneers now terrified no one but reminded everyone of how easily human lives had been commodified. And in every story, in every life rebuilt, in every family reunited, the lesson remained clear. Power without conscience destroys. Secrecy without accountability erases. But memory survives. Names survive. Stories survive. And even when the plantation, the buildings, and the land are gone, the people endure. Today, descendants of Thornhill still gather. They still share stories. They still trace bloodlines. Some still struggle with the knowledge that wealth and privilege in their families may have been built on exploitation. Others find hope in the resilience of those who survived, even in the face of unspeakable cruelty. Thornhill is no longer just a plantation. It is a cautionary tale. A reminder of what happens when morality is subverted by property. A testament to human endurance. Some ghosts may scream, but the ones that survive speak softly. They teach, they guide, they insist that history cannot be ignored. That acknowledgement is the first step toward healing. The last page of the ledger may be written. The cottage may be gone. The river may flow quietly through old fields. But the story of Thornhill, its mothers, its children, and its descendants will never end. It lives in memory, in family, and in the truth finally spoken. If you have followed this story from the beginning, you know its power. The echoes of Thornhill remind us that even in darkness, human resilience shines. Subscribe now so you do not miss any stories that reveal hidden truths. Share this video so the voices of the past are never forgotten. And leave a comment below. Would you want to know your family history even if it carried secrets like Thornhill? The story ends here, but the lessons live on.